Mr. Giulio Terzi, former Minister for Foreign Affairs of Italy, thank you so much for having us today.
It's a pleasure to talk with you and your readers and listeners.
Sir, let me start with Western Balkans. A new credible enlargement strategy for Western Balkans has been adopted by the European Union in 2018. While it fosters European integration along 6 flagship initiatives, it has also made any forthcoming accession less likely. So my question in that respect is, what can the European Union do to revitalize the EU accession process and keep the candidate countries from the region on a reform-oriented agenda?
The European Union is strongly attached to the neighborhood policy and to an increase of relation and the access of the Western Balkan countries, the 6 Western Balkan countries. 4 of them have the candidate status, and 2 of them, Bosnia and Kosovo, they have started this process and they are in a less advanced position, but surely they are considered with equal interest than the others. It is a keystone of the foreign and security policy for Europe. And not only for foreign and security policy, but for the very existence of the values and principle of rule of law, human rights, human dignity, and a general conception of the economy that Europe has. There is a specific article in the European Treaty which says that every country has the right to propose to accede to the European Union if the conditions are respected in relation to the principle that I have just mentioned. And the Western Balkans are in an advanced position. They belong to Europe. They have always belonged to Europe. And it is true that since 2008, when this accession process did accelerate, there have been a number of difficulties and stumbling blocks even due to economic and financial conditions and to political development inside the European member states and inside the countries of Western Balkans. But it is a reason of confidence to have witnessed the result of the latest Poznan summit early July, with the participation of head of state and government, foreign minister, the minister of energy, the minister of transport, that say all the areas of the economy which are vital to increase and reinforce the communication, the facilities for integrating the economic area of the Western Balkan and integrating the Western Balkan into the European economy, into the European institution. The Poznan summit was a success because it allowed the participants to define and to make a more precise commitment in a program concerning vital areas like energy, transport, digital economy, cooperation among member states, political cooperation, and above all, I think in this very moment, something which has to be considered very closely, security for the population and security for those states.
Mr. Terzi, in June 2019, the European Union unanimously extended the economic sanctions against Russia for another 6 months until the Minsk agreement are going to be fully implemented so that the peace is restored in eastern Ukraine. My question is, are the measures by the European Union against Russia, including the sanctions, restrictions on economic cooperation and so on and so forth, expected to really yield any result on the ground?
Sanctions is not a popular policy decision in Italy. And sanctions are not popular, not only with the public opinion, but European policies in general, because our first priority is to have a cooperative approach, and even in terms of security, a cooperative security in Europe. Therefore, they are in certain ways a last resort solution when there are strong violations of international law, the right of sovereignty for an individual member of the United Nations and of the European community, like Ukraine, and the infringement of all the principles which are the basis of the Helsinki Final Act about sovereignty of states, the inviolability of borders, and another principle which is equally important, the rights of minorities outside the borders of the motherland to be dealt with by the country and by the government of the country which is host to them. So what happened with the annexation of Crimea and the force, the de facto operation in eastern Ukraine was something which disappointed all the friends of Russia in Italy and in Europe. And I hope personally that the Minsk process will continue with a reinforced political will and even decisiveness by the European institution. And I have seen with optimism the role of President Macron and the meeting President Macron in Côte d'Azur some weeks ago with President Putin, and the common indication, if I understand correctly, that the Minsk process will be revamped in proper terms and effectively.
Mr. Terzi, I would like to a little bit touch upon on EU-Iran relations, and I am sure you have a lot to say about that. Iran has become a matter of tension in transatlantic relations following the withdrawal of US from Iran nuclear deal. However, on the other side, the EU is extremely determined, as we see, to keep the agreement alive despite Trump administration and its further sanctions against Tehran. So my question is, do you expect that the EU will finally have to also give up with Iran nuclear deal due to ongoing pressure coming from Washington?
The relationship with Iran is a question of trust, basically. And the Iranian regime has done everything possible over the last 15 years, at least one can say that looking at the history of since 2003, when the clandestine nuclear program was discovered by chance, one can see that the Iranian leadership is doing everything possible to prevent that the Western countries feel any trust vis-à-vis that leadership. They cannot trust them because there have been a number of cases, and I don't bother your audience and our audience in recounting all the cases in 2003, 2005, 2008, and even more recently with a unilateral violation of the engagement that they had taken with the JCPOA, when they have moved in a direction which is very clear the direction, because there are no other explanation why they are so engaged in the nuclear program, other than the target of having a nuclear weapon, because there is no need for energy in Iran to have such a huge enrichment program with high-grade uranium, which can be used. There's an overcapacity in production and an overcapacity in stocks that they have ready for weaponizing the whole system. So the question of trust is fundamental. There cannot be trust not only for what they are doing in the nuclear program, but also, and equally important, for what they are doing in the region. In the region, they are an element of igniting wars, using proxies, inserting themselves in local politics, destabilizing the situation in Iraq anytime there is the possibility of finally having a government of consensus, participation, inclusion. No, all they want to have the upper end of their Shia community, the IRGC, the Hezbollah, even the Iraqi Hezbollah, which has been formed in the mobilization forces there, not to talk about Syria, where they have confronted all the opponents of Assad in a way which has been exactly tailored on the measure for waving the banner of anti-terrorism, but using the anti-terrorism to destroy, to create a situation of ethnic cleansing against the Sunni tribes and the larger part of the population, the majority of the population, which is not of a Shia component of the Alawite part, 10-15% of the country, which is the one from which President Assad is originated. So it is something, is a major negative force that Iran is projecting, is a big cloud all over the region with huge violation of human rights outside its border, and not to talk about its border. We are still horrified by the elimination of more than 30,000 political prisoners in 1988 by a death commission which was composed by some of the most prominent politicians and officials still serving in the Rouhani government. So I could say many more things, but there is no doubt that the line taken by the American administration, and there's a line very coherent and efficient in its willingness to clarify the very dark spot which exists in the Iranian relationship with the European Union and with America. And it's only a pity that the nuclear deal was apparently signed with a sort of a quid pro quo, leaving Syria in the Iranian hands at the condition that they would sign the Iranian deal.
Mr. Terzi, since you touch upon a very key component of EU-Iran relations, I would like to touch upon the human rights part of it. Many argue that EU is basically throwing a blind eye to massive human rights violations in Iran in order to keep the Iranians around the table of nuclear deal. Are you also in the same opinion? Because there are a lot of criticism against the current High Representative of the Union when it comes to her engagement with Iran vis-à-vis the human rights matters.
It is shocking to see the disconnect which exists from the general line undertaken by the European Union, which has in its practical article of its constitution, the Treaty of the European Union, Article 21, is a specific commitment for European institutions, for member states, to promote human rights, rule of law, human dignity all over the world, and to put this element as a central point, as a pillar of their action at the international relations. So the European Union is simply forgetting all this. The major institution, the High Representative of Foreign Policy, Foreign Security Policy, is on the record for visiting and meeting a number of times the top Iranian officials, top mullahs, and always ignoring the fact that there is a treaty commitment to raise these issues and to try to advance on these issues. And there is a disconnect between the European Union and the United Nations. It is very strange that Iran is a very influential member of the United Nations, but still the United Nations have a High Commissioner for Human Rights, they have a Special Representative for Human Rights in Iran, which is never received, is never allowed to make any mission to Tehran, but still the United Nations are pursuing different bodies and different occasions in all instances. They are responding to the mission they have been created for. And and they do that even if Iran is a very influential member of the United Nations. So why the Europeans cannot at least do the same for a country which is not in the decision-making process of European Union?
Mr. Terzi, I would like to now touch upon another very important actor for the European Union, namely Turkey. My question is, despite all the challenges, including the massive backsliding of democratic values in Turkey under Erdogan administration, particularly since the attempted coup back in 2016, can the shattered EU-Turkey relations be somehow restored? And if your answer, sir, yes, how? Could you tell us?
Turkey is also an essential partner for the European Union, an essential partner in NATO. There is a strong bond of values which are set in that case not by the European Union Treaty but by the Treaty of Washington, which refers to exactly the same values that are so important, that are pillar for the European Union. So the fact that the Turkish situation is swinging towards an autocratic concept of power, and that in the concept of power it comes a repression, thousands of political prisoners, people indicted for reasons which are eminently political, the subjugation of the judiciary to the political power, the fact that there are requests for extradition against personalities who live abroad but which are targeted because they are considered enemies by the president of Turkey, but there are no evidence at all which has been produced.
Do you refer to, I'm sorry for interruption, do you refer to a specific group here? Or
I refer to some personality who is in the United States, and there's been an element of friction, the fact that the United States...
You mean Mr. Gulen?
Yes, they are not the American administration, which has a keen consideration of the rule of law, the extradition procedure, and the judiciary, has been quite careful in not taking a hasty decision on this case, because evidently they have not been found credible. And therefore, but not talking about this case, we have to be concerned by the number of journalists who have been imprisoned, have been tried, intimidated. And to be frank, I sensed a moment of relief witnessing what happened in Istanbul at the latest municipal election, when they had to be repeated and the opposition had the courage to go through the difficult procedure of repeating this election, although the opposition had won already in the first round this mayorship. But on the other hand, I saw a slight relief, as I said, the fact that President Erdogan recognized that an important city and civil society like the one in Istanbul, which is not to be characterized the fundamentalist majority of people, was recognized as the winner. So it is a very dynamic situation, the Turkish one. But the question of respect of human rights, fundamental freedom, and rule of law must remain very high in the agenda for Europeans, but I would say also for the Atlantic community, because it is extremely important. We must not be intimidated by the fact that the present Turkish government is showing openly, and I say blatantly, the willingness to find alternative alliances in very critical areas like Syria. And Syria, I've lived through these experiences of following in different capacities the Syrian situation, and since 2011, since the last development of the Arab Spring, I've always told all my interlocutors and also my government that the Syrian crisis was the most dramatic crisis that the international community was facing after World War II, and especially Europe and Mediterranean countries. And in fact, this war, this terrible, this horrendous civil war, has been dragging on for more than 7 years now through immense massacre of innocent people, of targets of hospital, children, areas, and the latest development we have seen in Aleppo 1 year ago, and now in the Idlib region, a region where we have 3,000 persons, around 3 million residents, and all these 3 million are regularly hit, bombed, massacred, because they are all considered in a safe zone, which was decided by Erdogan and Putin, in a safe zone which is not a safe zone, but it has become a killing field, and the international community should not accept that, because if this goes on, it shows there is no guarantee whatsoever that could be any sort of moderation for the other ethnic components of the Syrian very vibrant and rich society, which is not only the Alawite who are around Assad.
Mr. Terzi, last but certainly not least, we are heading to the forthcoming 17 September legislative elections in Israel, and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has recently expressed his aspirations basically to extend Israeli sovereignty on all Jewish West Bank settlements, which means annexing these occupied territories. My question is, beside the current positions, should the European Union resort to further and bolder measures in view of the proposed annexation of territories in West Bank?
The election in Israel is very important because Israel is a country, as you have seen recently, but even over the last few years, an increased tension and increased threats coming from Iran and from its proxies, Islamic Jihad, Hamas, and Hezbollah of every denomination, with the support of the Pasdaran IRGC. So Israel is a country which lives normally. It has a splendid economy, a fantastic research, an intellectual and economic example for many countries, and is in that region of the world, but also in absolute terms, a country of rule of law and of democracy. The point of relationship with the Palestinians has always been a very critical element of the relationship between the European Union and Israel. And I don't believe, quite frankly, that the European Union decision over the years have been the wisest to move towards a strategic partnership with Israel. We could create a better environment, especially calming the neighborhood, especially and referring particularly to Iran and Syria, and to create a situation where the security of the country is guaranteed and assured, and they are recognized as members of the international community with a vital need to be secure for the population. So when the Europeans are talking, many Europeans at least, many Europeans are talking about the contested territories or the occupied territories, the Palestinian rights, yeah, the debate in Brussels, and not only in Brussels, is intense. But we have to be very clear, to be very careful, to make sure that this debate does not degenerate in anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. Because, as we all know, over the last 5-6 years, there is this very despicable BDS movement, boycott, divest and sanction Israel, which originated in UK universities. It spread among other Western universities and was an element of raising not only criticism against the state of Israel, which is perfectly legitimate, but the way it was BDS construed was a way to spread violent racial anti-Semitism, to the point that there is a resolution, there are a number of resolutions by the Bundestag, by the German parliament, by French authorities. And overall, I think that half of the European member states, but is an improving snowball, is a growing snowball, have condemned in their declaration, in their policy statement, have officially condemned the BDS movement as an anti-Semitic and pro-terrorist organization.
Mr. Terzi, thank you so much for this insightful exchange and thank you so much for having us.